Hello to all of you attending today. Um, Wish you the very best. We are going to be talking about inflation today. This is one of the other critical aspects of macroeconomics that is of great concern to the government and to macroeconomists. Inflation is the general increase in prices for goods over a period of time. This is difficult to measure, but what they try to do is get a market basket of about 300 items, and they take a look at what the prices are, and then a month later, they take the same market basket and try to take a look at those prices and see how they compare. The difficulty you run into is, of course, our tastes change. Sometimes things that are in a market basket are no longer relevant. They have to replace it with another item. And sometimes items such as computers change or phones change, and they have new features, new capabilities. Is that inflation or is that just an improved product? And most certainly they try to do this. The most common, there are several indexes for, in fact, there's a wide variety of indexes for prices, such as on gasoline and everything, wholesale prices and all. But the most common one we hear about is CPI, or Computer Price Index. And that's what I basically have measured there. And so when you see something that says the CPI has gone up as equal to 2%, that means prices over the period of time that they're talking about, whether it's a month or a year or a quarter, have increased by 2%. Now, be careful when you listen, because sometimes they may say annually, at a rate of annually at 2%, which means over the last quarter, it's only been 0.5% in actual price increases. But they use the term sometimes backwards, either way. Who is helped by inflation? The people who are helped by inflation, particularly unanticipated inflation, are those who are in debt. If you owe a lot of money on a mortgage or otherwise, or the US government, national debt, inflation erodes the value of that money, that debt. What it will do, for example, with national debt, the size it is right now, if you have a 3% inflation rate, it will mean that the true value of the national debt during this next year will decrease by $650 billion. Well, that's a benefit to a debtor. All of us, of course, as citizens are debtors. But that's because we didn't anticipate it, or even if we anticipated, that's what happens with inflation. Who's hurt? Creditors. Creditors are number one, those who hold mortgages, particularly if it's unanticipated, and they took a mortgage out like I have right now at 2.5%. And all of a sudden inflation starts going up to 3, 4, 5%. Well, those who hold my mortgage will only get 2.5% from me, or 2.25% actually. And so over a period of time, the money I give to them will be worth less and less. They're getting paid less back on my loan than they're losing relative to inflation. Others that are hurt on inflation are people on fixed incomes, such as retired people. Even if they have a cost of living adjustment, often it's lower than what inflation can be. And so most certainly these people can be negatively affected. Social Security people tend to be somewhat in between. Theirs gets adjusted relative to the rate of inflation, although some people argue that the changes are not as high as the actual effect on those people. Some people argue that when inflation is fully anticipated, it's not really a problem. I would disagree, particularly if it gets in higher rates. A couple reasons. One, if inflation is at 12%, that means the interest rate is going to be at least 15% for new loans. Can you imagine? That means that on a $300,000 house, which is not untypical today, that just the interest payments on that house are going to be a whole lot of money. We're talking about $36,000 a year. Or if it's for 15%, we're talking about $45,000. it's hard to get in. Once you get in, you might be doing pretty well, but it's hard to get in to be able to get those initial payments done. On top of that, when inflation gets higher, and we've noticed this to be, it also tends to be less reliable and more volatile. It just bounces around, which makes investment very, very difficult. Now, there is the other side of inflation, that's deflation, and we tried to discourage that for a very good reason. The Fed actually likes to see a little inflation, about 2% at most, but 1.5%, 2%. And then the reason is because deflation discourages investment. If you have to pay more for resources than you'll be able to get when you sell the final product because prices have declined, then you're less inclined to want to invest. Think about it in terms of buying a house. Let's say you buy a house today, but you anticipate, or think about buying a house today, but you anticipate that housing prices will increase by 10%. You're not likely to buy the house. You'll just stay out of the market. And that's most certainly the same kind of concept that many producers and suppliers of goods and services would face. Now, there are two types of inflation. One of is relatively benign. I'm going to go share my screen here so you can see it. And what we have right here is demand pull. Let me push it up a little bit here. And as you see from this one right here, we have this original situation where we had this same demand curve, the same supply curve rather, but here's the first demand curve. And when we have inflation, we go to AD2, the higher over here is further to the right. Technically, you should always think about it as further to the right rather than higher. Well, what you see is prices have gone up, but so has the quantity produced. Therefore, the government, either through monetary policy or fiscal policy, which we'll be discussing both later on, have the option pretty easily of pulling back on it. Now, pulling back, pulling it to whatever, making money, cost of money, borrowing money, interest rates higher, possibly increasing taxes. They can reduce it and they can control this one. And yes, you'll have a reduction in GDP, but you're already higher in GDP because of the inflationary pressures. Now, if we want to take a look at the other kind, and that first one was strictly what we're talking about there, which is because there's excess demand. This one here is much more difficult. That's why I call it Mr. Nasty, or they've called it stagflation or anything else. Notice that again, the demand curve is stable, but the supply curve now has shifted to the left. Things have gotten more expensive. This could be either because of increasing healthcare costs, it could be increasing employee costs, it could be any kind of resource cost going up at a rapid rate. And the one time we really saw bad cost push inflation was in the late 1970s, and it was because of vastly increasing employee costs, healthcare costs, and gasoline costs at the same time. But look what has happened here. Again, here's the original. And when we have the change, yes, there's that price increase, there's that inflation, but it's a reduction in goods and services that occur. So what do you do to control it? And what we did to try to control it was the Fed slammed on the brakes, really hurt the economy, drove the unemployment rate up to 11%, but they did get rid of it. Well, the 11% unemployment rate is tough. And it took a long time to bring it down. But some conservatives like to call the golden age of Ronald Reagan, averaged 6.9% unemployment. Now, I don't blame the president for that, but most certainly it was not a golden age of employment for many, many people. So cost push is difficult and very hard to handle. So when you look at inflation, recognize that it's a difficult topic. It's controllable as long as demand pull, but if it becomes a cost push, it's much, much more difficult. The higher it gets, the less volatile. Well, I dropped something there. I hope that caught attention. But anyway, from higher it is, more volatile it is. And the other thing that's really important to recognize, the higher the inflation rate, the more expensive in interest rate it will cost you to borrow money. And that makes a big difference if you talk about large items like a household. Thank you very much. Talk to you soon. Bye.